that is the position that we're in. We're having the president of the United States operating the White House and the Pentagon as a cartel would operate their gang. The one profession in the Constitution that is protected is that of journalists. Freedom of the press is in the First Amendment, and that was deliberate. That was the founders understood the importance of not just of freedom of speech, but of journalists to do their jobs, to investigate wrongdoing by powerful public officials and to hold them accountable by showing a spotlight on it. And, Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, JD Vance, and Elon Musk have done a really good job of covering up that spotlight.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. We've got Kris Goldsmith back. He's the head of Task Force Butler, an organization that identifies and tracks extremists around the country to hold them accountable. We've got extremists in the henhouse now, Kris, and they're rooting out any potential critics. We've seen this with the banishment of the AP from the White House press office for daring to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico. But they're doing it in the Pentagon press office as well. Can you tell us about your latest Substack and the danger that this represents? If anything, it's more alarming than the clearinghouse of the White House press office because no information actually is conveyed there. It's all performative.
Yeah, so the Pentagon Press Corps is a group of reporters, journalists who normally travel with the Secretary of Defense, but they also have limited office space for some of these outlets within the Pentagon. The reason that press has access to the Pentagon is because that is our fourth branch, right? It is an essential cornerstone of our democracy. We need to know what our government is doing on our behalf. And Barbara Starr, who I believe led the Pentagon Press Association for a while, wrote in the Columbia Journalism Review about how it's essential that we get real journalists into the Pentagon because we are going to send troops to war. Again, it is going to happen. We are not living in a time of eternal peace. And families, military families, service members themselves, and American voters ought to know, what the justifications for coming conflicts are. It is what has happened is reputable outlets like NBC and the New York Times have been kicked out and replaced with propagandists like Breitbart and OAN and the New York Post. These are not nonpartisan journalistic outlets. These are propaganda outlets that are aligned with the politics of the administration, and they are not going to speak truth to power. In fact, we saw the mistakes of real credible journalists in the lead up to the war in Iraq. Right. That is why this is so important. We cannot have just propagandists in there.
Yeah, I don't want to diminish the importance of the White House press corps and that exercise of give and take between the administration and the fourth estate, the media. But when it comes to matters of life and death, yeah, there are some that occasionally arise to that level. You saw that during COVID, of course, but on an almost daily basis, like in the Pentagon briefing room, information is being conveyed that has to do with the life and death of our brothers and sisters and sons and daughters serving in uniform, and whether or not we decide to go to war. It really is the most important press space in the country.
Yeah, the Pentagon Press Association is the eyes and ears of the American public on the matters of warfare, of like you said, life and death, and also it's the biggest department in government. Notably, it's the one that Elon is not messing with his doggy committee, but it is the place that military families are going to for the truth about what is going to happen to them and their service members.
Was there a particular transgression, I should put that in air quotes, committed by one of these press organizations that led to the banishment, like when the AP refused to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America? Or is it just part of a broader strategy to purge any potential critics and replace them with mouthpieces for Pentagon and administration propaganda?
So the Pentagon and the White House have said that this is just part of a normal rotation. Getting these highly reputable outlets out and replacing them with propagandists is just coincidence. The White House and the Pentagon threw in HuffPo or Huffington Post into one of these slots that opened up because they purged the New York Times, NBC, and other credible outlets. And, the way that the Pentagon is hoping that Americans interpret this is, oh, look, it's fair. There's 3 right-wing propagandists, and then there's this famously left-wing HuffPo in there. HuffPo doesn't have a dedicated Pentagon reporter. They don't have someone to send right now. And they did not before they found out from a memo that was sent out from the new press secretary at the Pentagon that now they're going to get space in the Pentagon.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I used to write for HuffPo. I wasn't even sure they were still around. Like, if you're kicking out the New York Times, which invests millions in rigorous reporting for all its faults, right? The New York Times is a reporting organization, and you're giving that up to One American, OAN, or HuffPo. It is a slap in the face to actual journalism.
Yeah, I don't talk about my wife much on any show, right? But my wife is a journalist. She was a co-founder of Task and Purpose, which does have a Pentagon reporter. We have friends who are in that room. I've been interviewed by a lot of the journalists who are part of the Pentagon press corps. So this is something that matters deeply to me. It's not just theoretical. This is, these are people whose reputations I know personally. These are people who I know to be veterans in many cases, or military families. These are people with the utmost professionalism and ethics that you could possibly get reporting on anything. And to have them sidelined in favor of a bunch of know-nothing propagandists is not just bad for the country, but it's personally insulting to me and anyone who's ever served.
This all sounds very theoretical, but could you give us a scenario that might make it seem real? And this could be 2 weeks down the road, right? What happens if, let's say, I'm going to give you a ridiculous one, make it serious. If the Pentagon says Greenland has a stray nuke, we have to invade Greenland, right? There's a difference between having real reporters in the room and sycophants in the room. But what is your nightmare scenario with having an unaccountable Pentagon?
Yeah, so I think when someone watches television and they see a Pentagon press correspondent, someone like Barbara Starr used to be for CNN. She had done that for decades. They know when the Trump administration, the Biden administration, or the Obama administration were talking about what was going to happen in the Middle East. We as viewers know that Barbara Starr knows when they're bullshitting them, right? If you take any random journalist off the street and make them a Pentagon reporter, as will be the case with HuffPo, right? They did not have a Pentagon reporter. They're going to be taking someone who doesn't have the context of global conflicts, global diplomacy, and the history of conflicts between nations, or even knowledge about military equipment and the size of a battalion versus a brigade or a company versus a platoon. All of these words and these phrases might have meaning to us because we serve, but the average American can't tell you, how big a brigade is. They can't tell you, where certain duty stations are, what unit is at what duty station. These are things that the Pentagon press secretary will rattle off, as he's giving information from the podium. And if you have someone who's not catching half of the words, phrases, and the meaning, who's ostensibly there to report on what's going on in the military, we don't know anything. We as Americans won't know what our most powerful department within in the United States government is even up to. Let me kind of bring it home. There's a lot of reason to criticize the Biden administration over the Afghanistan withdrawal. It was an absolute mess. It was an absolute tragedy. I had friends who were in Afghanistan. My wife's colleagues were in Afghanistan during the fall. When that chaos was going on, without the base of knowledge of reporters and editors who were Pentagon specialists, evacuations would not have happened. Evacuations, not just of Americans, but of Afghan staff, would not have happened. Thousands more likely would have died. Thousands more certainly would have been abandoned. But because there was a tight-knit community of real Pentagon press correspondents and war correspondents more broadly, backed up by their editors who specialize in conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere, that made the evacuation of Afghanistan possible. That set a foothold so that lives could be saved. So, as we look at Trump throwing out statements like, we're going to take Gaza, it's going to be ours, we're going to own it, right? We don't want someone who doesn't know anything about the history of the Middle East sitting in the Pentagon press room trying to play catch up as the president of the United States is expounding ideas that are recruiting a generation of terrorists, of fighters who will want to kill Americans because of the words of the president, right? If you have somebody who doesn't know how dangerous it is to talk about ethnic cleansing, for an American president to talk about ethnic cleansing, that's someone who doesn't belong there, right? And my bet is that OAN, Breitbart, and the rest of the Trump propagandists are not going to push back on stuff like that, and that is a tremendous disservice to all of us as American citizens, as voters, as veterans, military families, and service members.
Hey everyone, it's Ken. I need a quick favor. We are launching Valor Media Network, a new YouTube channel to highlight positive role models who will take on the toxic influencers of the so-called manosphere. Think Joe Rogan. We've got some great hosts already lined up. You'll recognize some of them like Jason Kander, Dan Barkov, and Bobby Jones. And we've got more coming on board soon. Please click on the link below to Valor Media Network's YouTube page and hit that subscribe button. These early signups make all the difference. Thank you so much. I think you're right to highlight the trade of ignorance for competence. That's what we're seeing. But I think there's something else at work, which in the long run will be even more insidious. And it's, in addition to the lack of competence and the ignorance of these second-rate reporters and journalistic outfits that are filling those seats, it's what I anticipate to be their willingness to go along with the propaganda and the lies. I'm trying to imagine a Pentagon paper situation a year from now with Breitbart and OAN as the conduit for that kind of vital information that needs to make it to the American people.
Yeah, we're living in a time when the government of Germany is coming out and saying that never again, racism, never again hate, never again National Socialism, right? That is a response from our vice president J.D. Vance going over to Germany and lecturing Europeans on what his idea of free speech is. There used to be a pretty universal understanding of the idea, an appreciation for the idea that Nazis should never be given a platform, and that you have the shadow president Elon Musk and J.D. Vance going over and endorsing the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, which is a neo-Nazi party that German intelligence services, have linked to terrorist plots. That is profoundly disturbing. And if we end up in a place where OAN and Breitbart are the only journalists who are given the privilege of traveling with the Secretary of Defense, we're not going to get those quotes quite as easily. And I think I'd be remiss to fail to mention that during this recent overseas trip that Pete Hegseth just took, he invited one particular guy, especially. His name is Jack Posobiec. He's a former Navy officer, and anyone who's ever used Twitter has probably seen this guy. He's got a tremendously popular Twitter account. He is someone who has he was fired from a job for plagiarizing a neo-Nazi. He used to, back before he was really famous, he used to sneak in Nazi dog whistles, like the numbers 14 and 88, which 14 words is about basically genocide, and 88 means Hail Hitler, right? Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth picked that guy and took him with him overseas. So I want people to go to my Substack, On Offense with Kris Goldsmith, read the whole piece so that you can learn all of the details about Jack Posobiec. The SPLC has a tremendous extremist file on him, documenting, a decade plus of his history of affiliating with neo-Nazis. So when you've got guys who, use neo-Nazi dog whistles out in the open on Twitter, and you've got the vice president going overseas and chastising the Germans for not giving neo-Nazis a platform, I think you could better understand how dire of a situation we are in, and the full context of why Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump, and Elon Musk do not want the Pentagon press corps to have credible journalists gaining access to our military and to the political appointees who are in charge of running.
There's another threat that is developing in parallel with this, in parallel with the integration of propagandistic media outlets as unofficial mouthpieces for the Pentagon and the administration. And that parallel threat is the attacks on legitimate journalism. The suggestion by the president that the producers at 60 Minutes should go to jail. The amplification of that by Elon Musk. You pair the very real fear among credible, hardworking, values-driven journalists today with their replacement by these propagandists, and you've got, you've got a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and we've got billionaires who had been sued by Donald Trump at ABC and Meta and Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. And after Donald Trump won his reelection, they were just like, all right, it doesn't matter that this absolutely has no standing. We're going to give Donald Trump personally millions of dollars to settle these claims because we aren't interested in fighting the sitting president in court, because they know that Donald Trump would use the office to punish them.
I would also submit that their capitulation on that was perhaps less a way to settle those suits than a way to give Donald Trump money and find an excuse to do it. Like, what better way for ABC to give Donald Trump a $15 million bribe than to say it's the result of a lawsuit settlement?
I think you're right. I think you're right. and this bribe happened like bribes from the mafia in movies work, right? Like it's not really a bribe that they're just giving up. It's because they understand if they don't, their store is not going to be protected anymore, right? That is the position that we're in. We're having the president of the United States operating the White House and the Pentagon as a cartel would operate their gang, right? That is profoundly dangerous. I would note that the one profession in the Constitution that is protected is that of journalists. Freedom of the press is in the First Amendment, and that was deliberate. That was the founders understood the importance of not just of freedom of speech, but of journalists to do their jobs, to investigate wrongdoing by powerful public officials and to hold them accountable by showing a spotlight on it. And Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, JD Vance, and Elon Musk have done a really good job of covering up that spotlight and making it so that transparency within the whole of government is really becoming a thing of the past.
It really is a gangster presidency with a mob mentality, from their treatment of the press to, this is arguably even worse, their attempt to extort Ukraine and say, we're going to take half of your natural resources if you want our protection. If ever there was a geopolitical protection racket, that's it. Kris, I hate ending on a down note, but I feel like that's where we are today. Thanks for coming on, man. Sorry to ruin your day, but we'll talk.
No, hey, look, it's I try to end every one of my on offense posts with a call to action, right?
Give it to us.
People may feel powerless, and as I'm encouraging people, if they can, support my Substack, become a paying subscriber, that helps me continue to do this work. But you're also helping me to make it free. Anything that I publish for 2 weeks, anybody can read. Right. For people who can't afford to support journalism, these journalists and these outlets who are just kicked out, like NPR is a nonprofit, very important for our media ecosystem. Doing things like liking, sharing, and commenting on this video, on this podcast, on this clipping that you might see on Blue Sky or on Threads or on Instagram. Those things matter. Engagement with voices that you appreciate and that give you calls to action like this are good. If I want to encourage people, if you're following a bunch of folks on social media who every time you open a video, they're just going breaking news, right? That's there to give you the jump scare and to get you chemically addicted to the rise in emotion that you're going to get, right? We end these shows with calls to action. Even if it's all bad news and the world is burning, there are things that you can do, like, share, and comment on this video, this podcast, this little clip on wherever you find it on social media.
Thanks, Kris. We'll put all the links in the show notes. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, brother.